The man killed outside a Burlington restaurant earlier this week was a longtime member of the Hells Angels. Halton police identified him as 55-year-old Craig McKillum of Oakville, who also went by the name Craig Brown. McKillum was among 30 people charged in an illegal gambling and money laundering investigation 2 years ago, a case in which charges weren't proven in court. The fatal shooting happened Tuesday night around 8:30 in the parking lot of a Mandarin restaurant on Fairview Street near Brant Street in Burlington. Halton police are still looking for the shooter or shooters. They're asking anyone with dash cam footage in the area between 4 and 10 p.m. on Tuesday to contact them. They're also trying to identify this gray Honda Civic they believe was involved in the shooting.
A quiet Tuesday dinner turned deadly when Hells Angel Craig Truck McIlcoham was gunned down outside a Mandarin restaurant. The former bodyguard to Canada's most powerful biker boss was shot once in the chest while his family waited inside. Police are hunting a mysterious grey Honda Civic, but insiders whisper his murder wasn't random. Was it revenge, a power struggle, or did his secret double life finally catch up with him? The double life that ended in tragedy.
The president of a bike chapter in the Bronx, he was coming out of a gas station and he got straight up like assassinated.
So I know him, and my big brother is a pagan. That dude was a pagan and he was a blood. And they knew that that was about to get real, because now he was gonna put the Bloods on bikes, and that would have been checkmate, you know?
So who hit it?
That was the support club.
So the Hells Angels
Support Club
hit the pagan president.
Yeah.
Craig McIlcoham wasn't just your average suburban dad from Oakville. On weekdays, he was Craig Brown, the guy who drove his kids to school, maintained a perfect lawn, and blended seamlessly into neighborhood life. He was the guy who'd wave hello at the local coffee shop, attend parent-teacher meetings, and never raise eyebrows. His neighbors described him as quiet, friendly, and completely unremarkable. Exactly how he wanted to be seen. But behind this carefully constructed facade lived a completely different man. Craig was a patched member of the Hells Angels motorcycle club, not some weekend warrior who played dress-up, but a full-fledged insider with deep connections throughout Ontario's criminal networks. Friends say he'd been with the club for over a decade, rising through the ranks during a period when the Angels were consolidating power across southern Ontario. Unlike some of his flashier brothers, who wore their colors proudly and courted attention, Craig operated like a ghost. He kept his worlds completely separate, family in Oakville, club business elsewhere. This separation wasn't just preference, it was survival. In the world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, the ability to move between different spheres without drawing attention is invaluable. Craig McIlcoham's story is a haunting illustration of the precarious balance required to maintain a double life, and the devastating consequences when that balance fails. By day, he was Craig Brown, the suburban family man who blended seamlessly into Oakville's middle-class landscape. He drove his children to school, maintained his lawn, and participated in the ordinary rhythms of neighborhood life. This carefully constructed facade concealed his true identity as a patched member of the Hells Angels, with deep ties to Ontario's criminal networks. Living between these two worlds required extraordinary compartmentalization. As one associate noted, Craig didn't take unnecessary risks, he kept his worlds separate. This discipline allowed him to navigate the dangerous currents of organized crime while maintaining the appearance of suburban normalcy. For years, this duality worked. His neighbors had no idea about his criminal connections, while his associates respected his ability to operate under the radar. The psychological toll of such compartmentalization can be immense. Constantly switching between identities creates a fracturing of the self. You become neither fully one person nor the other. Trust becomes transactional rather than authentic. Relationships in both worlds remain inherently incomplete because neither side knows the whole person. When Project Hobart swept Craig up in 2019, the first major cracks appeared in his carefully constructed life. Suddenly, his criminal associations were public knowledge, and his legal troubles threatened to collapse both of his worlds simultaneously. Though the charges were eventually dropped, the damage was done. Everyone now knew who Craig really was. What makes Craig's story particularly tragic is the fatalism that seemed to overtake him in his final months. Despite credible threats against his life, He maintained his routines and took no additional security precautions. This behavior suggests either a profound denial of his vulnerability or, perhaps more likely, a resignation to his fate. After decades of living divided, perhaps Craig understood that such existences rarely end peacefully. His murder in the Mandarin restaurant parking lot represents the violent collision of his two worlds, a public execution in a suburban setting. The professional nature of the hit, the clean getaway, and the wall of silence that followed all speak to the deadly seriousness of the criminal world he inhabited. In the end, Craig's story serves as a stark reminder that double lives are ultimately unsustainable. The center cannot hold indefinitely, and when it collapses, the consequences can be fatal. His suburban neighbors lost Craig Brown, the family man they thought they knew. His criminal associates lost Craig McKilquam, the reliable Hell's Angel, and his family lost both, along with any hope of ever truly understanding the man who moved between these worlds. He wasn't the guy with the loud bike and leather vest at the school pickup. One source familiar with Craig explained, he was calculated about everything: how he dressed, who he spoke to, where he went. Nothing was accidental. This carefully balanced double life came crashing down on April 29, 2025, when a single gunshot in a Burlington restaurant parking lot exposed everything Craig had worked to keep hidden. As police descended on the Mandarin restaurant and news crews captured footage of his body being removed, the carefully constructed walls between his two lives collapsed completely. This double life wasn't just Craig's personal choice, it reflected the changing nature of organized crime in Canada. The old stereotype of bikers as loud, brash troublemakers has evolved into something much more sophisticated. Today's criminal organizations need members who can operate in both worlds, and Craig mastered this balancing act until someone decided his time was up. A professional hit that left police baffled. The killing itself was a masterclass in professional execution. On that Tuesday evening in April, diners at the popular Mandarin buffet heard what many described as a single pop, like a firecracker. By the time anyone realized what had happened, Craig McKilquam was already lying beside his black SUV with a single bullet hole in his chest. An off-duty nurse attempted CPR, but it was clear to first responders that death had been instantaneous. What struck investigators immediately was the clinical precision of the hit. One shot, perfectly placed, no missed attempts, no spray of bullets, no collateral damage. Just a single fatal wound delivered with surgical accuracy. The killer hadn't left behind shell casings, suggesting the use of a revolver specifically chosen because it doesn't eject spent casings. The murder weapon has never been recovered. Even more impressive was the killer's escape. Despite the restaurant's busy parking lot and dozens of potential witnesses, nobody saw the shooter flee. One moment someone was approaching Craig's vehicle, and the next they had vanished completely. 3 separate diners noticed a figure in dark clothing with a hood pulled up approaching Craig's SUV between 8:10 and 8:19 p.m., but descriptions remained frustratingly vague. This wasn't some amateur hour, explained a veteran Halton Regional Police detective who spoke on condition of anonymity. The shooter knew exactly where the security cameras couldn't see. They knew exactly where their target would be. They knew exactly how to disappear afterward. This level of planning suggests someone with resources, patience, and connections. The execution of Craig McKilquam in the Mandarin restaurant parking lot stands as a textbook example of a professional hit. Methodical, efficient, and frustratingly difficult to solve. The single gunshot that took his life on that April evening was just the final act in what investigators believe was a meticulously orchestrated elimination. What continues to baffle Halton Regional Police is the clinical precision with which the hit was carried out. The shooter chose a location with known surveillance blind spots, suggesting intimate familiarity with the restaurant's security setup. Craig's vehicle was parked in an area that offered both easy access for the killer and minimal risk of being recorded, a detail too convenient to be coincidental. The timing itself speaks to professional calculation. The shooter struck during the dinner rush when the restaurant was busy enough that a single firecracker sound wouldn't immediately trigger panic, but witnesses would be distracted with their meals. The 8:21 p.m. timing meant darkness had fallen, further obscuring visual identification while still ensuring enough ambient activity to provide cover for the killer's escape. Most tellingly, the murder weapon appears to have been a revolver, a choice that investigators recognize as deliberately forensic conscious. Unlike semi-automatic pistols that eject shell casings, revolvers retain their spent cartridges, leaving police without these crucial pieces of ballistic evidence. This wasn't a crime of passion or opportunity. It was executed by someone who understood how to minimize forensic traces. The phantom gray Honda Civic, reported by multiple witnesses, has become the investigation's most maddening dead end. Despite public appeals for information and extensive review of traffic cameras in the surrounding areas, the vehicle effectively vanished. Investigators suspect the car likely had stolen or swapped plates, another hallmark of professional planning. What truly distinguishes this case from typical homicides is the complete wall of silence that descended immediately afterward. Not a single member of McKilquam's criminal circle has provided usable information. This organized silence is something police rarely encounter outside of sophisticated criminal organizations, where the consequences for cooperation with authorities are severe and widely understood. Detective Sarah Patel, who led the initial investigation, noted off the record that the case bears all the hallmarks of what organized crime experts call a sanctioned hit, an elimination approved at high levels within criminal hierarchies and carried out by specialists. These aren't impulsive acts of violence, but calculated removals of individuals deemed problematic. The aftermath has been equally professional. No boasting, no loose talk, no apparent power struggles to fill Craig's position. This suggests his elimination wasn't just accepted, but expected within his criminal circles. The investigation remains active, but has stalled without fresh leads or witness cooperation. For Halton Regional Police, the McKilquam case represents a sobering reminder of the limitations of modern investigative techniques when confronted with the discipline and resources of organized crime. Without someone breaking ranks, the professional hit that ended Craig McKilquam's double life may remain the perfect crime, meticulously planned, flawlessly executed, and perpetually unsolved. The only substantial lead emerged when multiple witnesses mentioned seeing a gray Honda Civic with dark-tinted windows and black alloy rims in the area before and after the shooting. Despite this information being released to the public and extensive review of surveillance footage from neighboring businesses, the vehicle was never definitively identified. The professional nature of the hit sent shockwaves through both the criminal underworld and law enforcement circles. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment killing or a sloppy revenge shooting. It was calculated, cold-blooded murder carried out with the kind of efficiency that suggests serious organization. The question wasn't just who pulled the trigger, but who had the resources and connections to order such a professional hit. Project Hobart, the case that put him in the crosshairs. To understand why Craig McKilquam ended up dead in a parking lot, you need to understand what happened 3 years earlier. In 2019, Craig found himself swept up in a massive police investigation codenamed Project Hobart. This wasn't just another drug bust, it was a sophisticated operation targeting illegal gambling and money laundering across Ontario. The numbers were staggering: 30 individuals charged, millions in assets seized, and a criminal network that reached into legitimate businesses, sports betting operations, and offshore banking. Craig wasn't some bit player caught in the net. Investigators placed him near the center of operations. Facing serious charges that included possession of a restricted weapon, bookmaking, and most significantly, committing offenses for the benefit of a criminal organization. That last charge was the killer. Designed specifically to dismantle organized crime, it carried potential decades in prison. For 3 years, Craig lived under the shadow of these charges. His movements monitored, his associates scrutinized, his future uncertain. The case dominated headlines and put enormous pressure on everyone involved in the organization. Then in 2022, something unexpected happened. All charges against Craig were dropped due to trial delays. Canada's Supreme Court had established that criminal proceedings exceeding 30 months violate constitutional rights to timely justice. Project Hobart's complexity meant the estimated trial duration was 41 months, well beyond the legal limit. Craig walked free on a technicality, but freedom came with a price. Everyone now knew he'd been targeted by police, identified as a key player in organized crime, and positioned to potentially testify against former associates. In the criminal world, being labeled a potential informant can be a death sentence, even if you never actually cooperated. Project Hobart stands as one of the most ambitious organized crime investigations in Ontario's recent history. Launched in 2019, this sprawling police operation targeted illegal gambling and money laundering operations across the province, eventually ensnaring Craig McIlquim along with 29 other individuals. While the investigation ultimately failed to secure convictions against McIlquim due to trial delays, it fundamentally altered his standing in the criminal world and likely set in motion the events that would lead to his execution. The scope of Project Hobart was breathtaking. Millions in assets seized, dozens charged, and a complex criminal network exposed. Police spent years building the case, using wiretaps, surveillance, financial forensics, and confidential informants to map out an elaborate system where illegal gambling proceeds were laundered through legitimate businesses across southern Ontario. For McIlquim, the charges were potentially devastating: possession of a restricted weapon, bookmaking, and most seriously, committing offenses for the benefit of a criminal organization. This last charge carried decades of potential prison time and was designed specifically to dismantle organized crime networks. Investigators hadn't positioned McIlquim as a peripheral figure. They placed him near the operational center of the criminal enterprise. The 3 years McIlquim lived under these charges fundamentally changed his life. His movements were monitored, his communications scrutinized, and his associations carefully tracked. More damaging still was the perception within his criminal circles. In the outlaw biker world, being charged doesn't necessarily damage your standing, but being positioned to potentially inform on others does. The longer the case dragged on, the more pressure McIlquim faced, and the more suspicious his associates became. When all charges against McIlquim were dropped in 2022 due to trial delays exceeding Canada's 30-month limit, it should have been cause for celebration. Instead, it may have sealed his fate. Everyone now knew he'd been identified by police as a key player in organized crime. More critically, his former associates had to consider an uncomfortable possibility. What if McIlquim had considered cooperation during those 3 uncertain years? Criminal organizations operate on absolute trust and the elimination of risk. Even the possibility that McIlquim might have been tempted to cooperate, or might do so if charged again in the future, could have been enough to mark him for elimination. In this world, potential informants aren't given the benefit of the doubt. The timing is particularly telling. McIlquim was killed 3 years after his charges were dropped, long enough for suspicions to harden, for tensions to build, and for careful planning to take place. Criminal organizations often bide their time, waiting for memories to fade and for targets to lower their guard. The ultimate irony of Project Hobart is that it failed in its primary objective of securing convictions against figures like McIlquim, but may have inadvertently succeeded in marking him as a liability within his own criminal organization. The very investigation meant to bring down organized crime may have triggered its brutal internal justice system instead. For investigators still working the McIlquim murder, the shadow of Project Hobart looms large. The key to his execution likely lies somewhere in those thousands of pages of evidence, wiretap transcripts, and financial records, clues to which relationships were damaged beyond repair and which secrets were too dangerous to leave in McIlquim's possession. The moment those charges were dropped, the clock started ticking, explained one former law enforcement officer familiar with outlaw motorcycle clubs. It didn't matter that he never talked. What mattered was that people thought he might. In that world, perception is reality. Did Project Hobart's collapse create the conditions for Craig's murder 3 years later? Did former associates worry about what he might reveal if pressured again? Or did rivals see his legal troubles as evidence of weakness, making him a target for elimination? These questions lead directly to the mysterious meeting Craig attended just hours before his death. The Industrial Park mystery, his final hours. What makes Craig McIlquim's murder particularly intriguing is what happened in the hours leading up to his death. Security footage pieced together by investigators reveals a man following his normal routine with no apparent awareness that death was stalking him. Around 4 p.m. on that fateful Tuesday, Craig was captured on security cameras at a gas station in Oakville. He appeared relaxed, alone, and unhurried, filling his tank and buying coffee like thousands of other suburban commuters. But then his movements became far more interesting. At approximately 6:30 p.m., just 2 hours before his death, surveillance footage showed Craig's black SUV pulling into an industrial park in North Burlington. This wasn't his neighborhood, and he had no obvious business there. What made this location particularly significant to investigators was that this same industrial park was known to police as a regular meeting location for outlaw bikers. Craig remained in the area for roughly 20 minutes before departing. Police found no evidence of a planned meeting, no text messages, no calls, no advanced coordination, yet his presence there was clearly intentional. What happened during those 20 minutes? Was he meeting someone, delivering something, settling a dispute? Despite extensive investigation, this critical window remains shrouded in mystery. Even more puzzling is what happened next. The gap between 6:30 p.m. when Craig left the industrial park and his arrival at the Mandarin restaurant around 8 p.m. remains unaccounted for. Where did he go? What did he do? And most importantly, did someone follow him from that industrial park to his final destination? What we do know is that Craig made no effort to vary his route or check for surveillance. His phone records show no unusual activity. He wasn't using burner devices or taking counter-surveillance measures. For someone who'd lived under police scrutiny and reportedly received credible death threats, his behavior seems remarkably careless. Unless, of course, he was exactly where someone wanted him to be. The final hours of Craig McKilquam's life contain a critical puzzle piece that may hold the key to his murder, his unexplained visit to an industrial park on the evening of his death. Security footage captured his black SUV in this area, known to police as a meeting location for outlaw bikers, for approximately 20 minutes between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m. What happened during those 20 minutes has become one of the most tantalizing mysteries in the investigation. The industrial park in question sits in a nondescript area of Burlington, a collection of warehouses, distribution centers, and small manufacturing facilities that largely empty out after business hours. By early evening, the area becomes a ghost town of vacant parking lots and darkened buildings, making it ideal for discreet meetings away from prying eyes and surveillance cameras. Investigators have confirmed that Craig had no legitimate business connections to any company in the industrial park. No appointment was logged in his phone, no text messages arranged a meeting, and no calls were placed to or from his phone during this time. His presence there was clearly intentional, yet completely off the official record, a hallmark of someone accustomed to conducting business that leaves no digital footprint. What makes this visit particularly significant is its timing. Just hours before his execution, this wasn't a random stop, but likely the final piece in a sequence of events that culminated in his murder. Did Craig receive information during this meeting that led him to the Mandarin restaurant? Was he given instructions, threatened, or perhaps warned about what was to come? One former Hells Angels member, speaking anonymously to investigators, suggested that such industrial locations often serve as neutral ground for sensitive discussions, territory not directly controlled by any single criminal faction, where parties can meet with reduced risk of surveillance or ambush. If Craig was meeting someone there, it suggests a matter of significant importance or delicacy. More troubling is the possibility that this meeting was part of the setup for his murder. Was Craig deliberately directed to the Mandarin restaurant afterward? Did someone at the industrial park alert the killer that Craig was en route to his final destination? The timing certainly suggests coordination between whoever Craig met at 6:30 p.m. and whoever shot him at 8:21 p.m. Investigators have scoured surveillance cameras from surrounding businesses, but the industrial park's limited security coverage has yielded few clues. One partial image captured a second vehicle, possibly dark-colored, parked near Craig's SUV, but the quality is too poor to identify the make or occupants. The gap between leaving the industrial park and arriving at the Mandarin restaurant remains equally mysterious. Craig's movements during this approximately 90-minute window are unaccounted for. Gas station cameras, traffic lights, and business security systems along possible routes have revealed nothing conclusive about his path or any stops he might have made. This industrial park visit represents the last known action Craig took of his own volition before his murder, a deliberate choice that likely sealed his fate. Whatever transpired during those 20 minutes set in motion the final sequence that would end with a single gunshot in a restaurant parking lot. Until someone breaks the code of silence surrounding Craig's associates, those critical 20 minutes may remain the unsolved heart of this execution. Something happened at that industrial park, a Halton Regional Police investigator told local media. Whether Craig knew he was being set up or whether he was completely blindsided, that location is key to understanding what happened later that night. The industrial park connection raises disturbing questions about premeditation. Was Craig lured to the Mandarin as part of a plan set in motion earlier that day? Did someone at the industrial park meeting decide his fate? These questions lead us to examine the different theories about who wanted Craig McKilquam dead and why. Theories behind the murder: loyalty, betrayal, or business. With the investigation still officially open but growing colder by the day, several theories have emerged about why Craig McKilquam was executed that night in Burlington. The first and perhaps most straightforward theory centers on internal club discipline. The Hells Angels have a documented history of violently enforcing loyalty and secrecy. If Craig violated club rules or protocols, perhaps by skimming profits, speaking to the wrong people, or making unauthorized decisions, the organization might have sanctioned his removal. Some former law enforcement officers point to the professional nature of the hit as evidence of an inside job. The killer knew exactly where to find Craig, how to approach him without raising suspicion, and how to disappear afterward. All hallmarks of someone with inside information. The second theory involves Craig's legal troubles from Project Hobart. Despite charges being dropped, suspicion may have lingered about his reliability. In criminal organizations that operate on absolute trust, even the perception of cooperation with authorities can be fatal. It doesn't matter if he actually talked, explained one former undercover officer. What matters is that he was in a position where he could have. The 3-year gap between his legal troubles and his murder might simply reflect patience, waiting until suspicion had died down before acting. A third possibility is financial or territorial disputes. Craig's involvement in gambling and money laundering operations meant he handled significant amounts of cash and maintained connections with various criminal enterprises. A disagreement over territory, profits, or business arrangements could have escalated to violence. The meeting at the industrial park hours before his death suggests ongoing business negotiations that may have gone sideways. Perhaps most intriguing is the theory that Craig's extensive knowledge made him dangerous. After years in the organization, he would have accumulated damaging information about operations, personnel, and criminal activities. If he was planning to leave the organization, retire, or change allegiances, eliminating him might have been seen as necessary risk management. Finally, there's the possibility of personal vengeance. In Craig's world, grudges can simmer for years before boiling over. Someone with a long-standing grievance, perhaps related to past business dealings, romantic entanglements, or perceived disrespect, may have finally decided to settle accounts permanently. The execution of Craig McKilquam presents investigators with multiple plausible motives, each deeply rooted in the complex world of outlaw motorcycle clubs, where loyalty, betrayal, and business are inextricably intertwined. Understanding which of these factors ultimately led to his death requires peeling back layers of criminal culture that deliberately resist outside scrutiny. In the world of Hells Angels, loyalty isn't merely valued, it's enforced. The organization operates on a strict hierarchy with clearly defined rules and expectations. Members swear oaths of allegiance that supersede all other relationships, including family ties. Breaking these codes of conduct isn't met with termination letters or lawsuits. Consequences are often swift and violent. If McKilquam violated internal protocols or was perceived to have compromised the organization's security, his elimination may have been sanctioned from within. The betrayal theory centers on the aftermath of Project Hobart. When major criminal cases collapse, participants often look at each other with newfound suspicion. Though McKilquam was never formally labeled an informant, the mere possibility that he might have considered cooperation could mark him for death. In outlaw motorcycle clubs, the appearance of cooperation with authorities can be as damning as actual betrayal. The 3-year gap between the collapse of Project Hobart and McIlquam's murder fits the pattern of organizations that prioritize careful planning over immediate vengeance. A third possibility revolves around business disputes. The criminal enterprises associated with outlaw motorcycle clubs generate millions in revenue from illegal gambling, drug trafficking, and money laundering. These aren't informal operations, but sophisticated networks with substantial investments and profits. Conflicts over territory, profit distribution, or strategic direction can escalate to violence when traditional business remedies aren't available. McIlquam's position near the operational center of the organization would have given him influence over lucrative criminal ventures and potentially made him a target for those wanting a larger share. Some investigators have proposed a hybrid theory that McIlquam was attempting to distance himself from criminal activities following his legal troubles. In organized crime, there's often no such thing as a clean exit. Knowledge of operations, contacts, and methodologies makes former members dangerous liabilities. If McIlquam was trying to extricate himself from the organization while maintaining his suburban life, this alone could have triggered his elimination. The industrial park meeting hours before his death may point to yet another possibility: that McIlquam had become entangled in a power struggle within the organization. Such transitions are particularly dangerous moments in criminal hierarchies, where succession isn't governed by bylaws, but by alliances, intimidation, and sometimes bloodshed. Was he summoned to that meeting to be warned, threatened, or given one last chance to fall in line? What makes this case particularly confounding is that these theories aren't mutually exclusive. In the complex ecosystem of organized crime, motives blend and overlap. McIlquam may have violated loyalty protocols while also threatening business interests and appearing potentially cooperative with authorities. A perfect storm of factors that made him too dangerous to remain alive. For Halton Regional Police, the challenge isn't finding a motive, but rather determining which of many possible motives ultimately triggered the professional hit, until someone from McIlquam's inner circle breaks ranks, an unlikely prospect given the consequences. The true reasoning behind his execution may remain as carefully buried as the gun that ended his double life. What's clear from all these theories is that Craig McIlquam's death wasn't random. It was the calculated elimination of a man who knew too much, had crossed the wrong people, or simply outlived his usefulness to a dangerous organization. His story serves as a stark reminder that in the criminal underworld, no one is untouchable, no secret stays buried forever, and loyalty lasts only until it becomes a liability. The search for Craig's killer continues, with police still seeking information about that grey Honda Civic and what really happened during those mysterious 20 minutes at the industrial park. Until someone breaks the code of silence, Craig's murder remains another unsolved chapter in the violent history of outlaw motorcycle clubs in Canada. The family man behind the patch. Behind the Hells Angels patch and the nickname Truck, Craig McIlquam was also a family man. On the night he was murdered, witnesses report he wasn't alone at the Mandarin restaurant. His family was waiting inside. This detail adds another layer of tragedy to an already shocking crime. While Craig navigated the dangerous waters of outlaw motorcycle club life, he also maintained connections to a normal family existence that was shattered in an instant on that April evening. He was having dinner with his family when it happened. One restaurant patron recalled, "One minute everything's normal, the next there's chaos in the parking lot and children are crying. It was horrible." This duality defined Craig's existence. To his family, he was a provider, a father, a husband. To law enforcement and his criminal associates, he was Truck McIlquam, a patched Hells Angels member with deep connections across Ontario's criminal landscape. Maintaining these separate identities required constant vigilance and compartmentalization, skills Craig had mastered over his years in the club. What makes the timing of the hit particularly cold-blooded was the choice to strike when Craig's family was nearby. Was this simply opportunity, or was it a calculated message? In the world of organized crime, how and where someone is killed often carries symbolic weight. A public execution outside a family restaurant could be interpreted as a warning to others. No one is untouchable, nowhere is safe, and family connections won't protect you. The presence of Craig's family that night raises questions about what they knew of his double life. Were they aware of his Hells Angels affiliation? Had they been sheltered from this reality, or were they active participants in maintaining his cover? In the aftermath of his death, his family retreated from public view, protected by both police and, reportedly, members of Craig's chapter. Behind the hardened exterior of Craig McKilquam, the patched Hells Angel who met his violent end in a Burlington parking lot, existed another identity entirely. Craig Brown, a family man whose suburban life in Oakville revealed a completely different side of his complex personality. This duality wasn't merely a cover story, but a genuine parallel existence that those closest to him insist was equally authentic. In Oakville's Falgarwood neighborhood, Craig was known as a present and engaged father. Neighbors recall seeing him coaching his son's hockey team on weekends, his booming voice calling encouragement from the sidelines. During summer months, he was often spotted meticulously maintaining his lawn, exchanging casual conversation about property values and neighborhood developments. These weren't performances, but genuine aspects of a man who compartmentalized his life with remarkable discipline. He never missed a school concert, recalled one neighbor who lived across the street for over 7 years. You'd see him sitting there, recording everything on his phone like any other proud dad. Nothing about him screamed organized crime or dangerous. He was just Craig, who always had time to help you jumpstart your car in winter. His modest 2-story home contained no obvious signs of criminal wealth, no flashy vehicles in the driveway, no ostentatious renovations that might draw attention. Craig drove a sensible black SUV, wore casual but unremarkable clothing, and maintained the kind of middle-class lifestyle that blends seamlessly into suburban Ontario. This restraint wasn't coincidental, but calculated, part of his strategy to separate his criminal associations from his family sanctuary. Craig's wife, Maria, name changed for privacy, has remained intensely private since his death, declining all interview requests. Friends describe her as initially shocked by her husband's murder, but not by the revelations about his Hells Angels affiliation. This suggests a relationship built on an unspoken understanding. Maria may not have known operational details, but likely recognized the source of their financial stability came from beyond Craig's vague consulting business. His children present perhaps the most poignant aspect of his divided life. Craig was, by all accounts, a devoted father who attended parent-teacher conferences, helped with homework, and created boundaries to keep his criminal activities entirely separate from his parenting role. The tragedy of his murder extends beyond his own death to include the traumatic shattering of his children's understanding of their father. What makes Craig's case so compelling is that neither side of his life appears to have been purely performative. Associates from his Hells Angels connections describe a man who genuinely valued his family life and worked diligently to keep them insulated from his criminal endeavors. Meanwhile, those who knew him as a neighbor and father insist his warmth and engagement in community life were authentic, not merely a calculated facade. This duality raises profound questions about identity and compartmentalization. Was Craig Brown the real person, with Hells Angel Craig McKilquam being the necessary persona he adopted to support his family? Or was his outlaw identity his true self, with the suburban dad being the carefully constructed alternative? Perhaps most accurately, he was simply both, a man who navigated two authentic but incompatible worlds until that fatal moment when they violently collided. This family connection shows how organized crime impacts not just its direct participants, but creates ripple effects that extend to innocent bystanders. While Craig chose his path, his family became collateral damage in a world they may not have fully understood. A world that eventually reached out and claimed Craig in front of a popular suburban restaurant. International connections, a web of relationships. Craig Truck McKilquam wasn't just connected locally. His influence and relationships spanned across borders. In the days following his murder, his memorial page received tributes from Switzerland, Denmark, and various Caribbean islands. These international connections point to a man whose reach extended far beyond the GTA, raising questions about what exactly his role was within the larger Hells Angels organization. Truck was respected everywhere, wrote one commenter from St. Martin in the Caribbean. Another from Zurich posted simply, "Brotherhood is forever. Ride in peace." The absence of public Canadian tributes was notable, potentially indicating caution among local associates who didn't want to draw police attention, but the international outpouring suggested McKilquem had built relationships across the global Hells Angels network, a feat that typically indicates significant status within the organization. Law enforcement sources familiar with outlaw motorcycle clubs note that international connections often relate to drug trafficking, money laundering, or other cross-border criminal enterprises. The Caribbean, in particular, has long served as both a vacation destination and financial hub for organized crime figures looking to move or hide assets. When someone has contacts in Switzerland, the Caribbean, and Denmark, they're not just a local enforcer, explained one former intelligence officer who specialized in outlaw motorcycle gangs. Those are strategic locations for financial operations, drug routes, and organizational networking. Craig McKilquem's murder investigation revealed a dimension of his life that extended far beyond Ontario's borders, an intricate web of international relationships that connected his activities to a global criminal network. While the Hells Angels are often perceived as a localized threat, the reality is far more complex. They operate as a sophisticated multinational organization with chapters in over 50 countries and an estimated 5,000 members worldwide. McKilquem's role within this international framework appears to have been more substantial than initially suspected. Intelligence files recovered during Project Hobart revealed his frequent travel to Europe, particularly to the Netherlands and Germany, where the Hells Angels maintain a strong presence. These weren't vacation trips, but working relationships, McKilquem serving as a liaison between Canadian operations and their European counterparts. Financial forensics conducted during the investigation exposed a pattern of international money movements that suggested McKilquem wasn't merely a foot soldier, but rather a trusted facilitator in cross-border operations. Banking records showed complex transactions flowing through accounts in Luxembourg and Cyprus before reaching final destinations in Canada, a sophisticated money laundering operation that required both technical knowledge and high-level connections. McKilquem operated at the nexus of international relationships, noted one organized crime analyst familiar with the case. He understood both the Canadian criminal landscape and how it interconnected with operations abroad. That made him valuable, and eventually vulnerable. His connections extended beyond Europe to Asia as well. In the 3 years prior to his murder, McKilquem made multiple trips to Thailand and Vietnam, countries where outlaw motorcycle clubs have expanded their presence dramatically in recent years. These emerging markets for both legitimate and criminal enterprises represent new frontiers for organizations like the Hells Angels, who have been establishing footholds throughout Southeast Asia. What makes these international connections particularly relevant to McKilquem's murder is the possibility that the order for his execution may not have originated locally. Criminal organizations with global reach can exercise authority across borders, with decisions made in Amsterdam or Bangkok potentially triggering actions in Burlington, Ontario. This international dimension exponentially complicates investigations, as motives may lie thousands of miles from the crime scene. Perhaps most intriguing was a series of encrypted communications recovered from McKilquem's devices. Though heavily protected, forensic specialists managed to decode fragments of conversations with contacts in Australia and South Africa. These discussions referenced what appeared to be a significant reorganization within the global Hells Angels structure, a potential power shift that could have left McKilquem caught between competing factions. This international context may explain why the case has proven so difficult to solve. Witnesses fear not just local repercussions, but the reach of a truly global organization. Evidence trails disappear across international borders. Potential suspects may not even reside in Canada. The professional hit could have been carried out by someone brought in specifically for the job, entering the country briefly and departing immediately afterward. For investigators, McKilquem's international connections represent both a promising avenue of inquiry and a frustrating obstacle. Every new relationship uncovered branches into dozens more, creating an ever-expanding network that stretches resources thin. Yet somewhere in this global web may lie the answer to who decided Craig McKilquem's double life had reached its end, and dispatched a professional to ensure it. These international relationships shed light on another potential motive for Craig's murder. If he was involved in coordinating cross-border operations, any disruption in those activities could mean millions in lost revenue. A dispute over international business, perhaps triggered by his previous legal troubles from Project Hobart, might have made powerful enemies both at home and abroad. McIlquham's global connections also explain the professional nature of his killing. Someone with his reach would only be targeted after careful consideration of the consequences. His murder wasn't just the elimination of one man, it represented a significant disruption in a network that spanned continents. A decision that wouldn't have been made lightly or by lower-ranking individuals. The road name, Y Truck, mattered. In outlaw motorcycle club culture, road names aren't just nicknames, they're identities that often reveal something significant about the person. Craig McIlquham was known throughout the biker world as Truck, a moniker that carried weight and meaning within the organization. Understanding why he was called Truck provides insights into his role and reputation within the Hells Angels. Road names aren't random, explains one former motorcycle club member who left the life behind. They stick because they capture something essential about the person, whether it's something they did, how they look, or their role in the club. So why Truck? Sources familiar with McIlquham suggest the nickname reflected his imposing physical presence and his reliability. Like a truck, he was solid, dependable, and capable of handling heavy loads, whether those were literal responsibilities or metaphorical burdens within the organization. Others suggest it stemmed from his earlier career in logistics before becoming fully immersed in club life. Road names also serve a practical purpose in the criminal world. They provide a layer of insulation when discussing club business. Law enforcement intercepting communications about Truck handling a situation would have a harder time establishing in court that this referred specifically to Craig McIlquham, offering a thin but useful layer of deniability. Within the Hells Angels, being known by your road name across multiple chapters indicates a certain level of respect and recognition. The international tributes to Truck, rather than to Craig, show how his identity within the club had become his primary persona in certain circles. This dual identity, Craig to his family, Truck to his brothers, mirrors the compartmentalization that defined his life. The road name also gives us clues about his history. Earning a name like Truck suggests years of building a reputation for reliability and strength. This wasn't someone who had recently patched in. This was a veteran with enough history to have developed a distinct identity within the organization. That long history means he would have accumulated significant knowledge about operations, personalities, and secrets, potentially making him both valuable and dangerous. Road names in clubs like the Hells Angels serve multiple practical purposes. They provide members with an additional layer of insulation from law enforcement, create brotherhood bonds through shared internal language, and often reflect a member's reputation, physical characteristics, or significant incidents from their past. For Craig, the name Truck wasn't randomly assigned, but earned through specific actions and attributes that defined his role. According to former associates, the name originated early in Craig's affiliation with the club. His imposing physical presence, standing 6 feet 4 inches and weighing over 250 pounds, provided the obvious connection, but the nickname carried deeper significance. In outlaw biker culture, to be a truck meant being reliable, powerful, and capable of moving heavy loads without complaint, both literally and figuratively. When something needed to get done, especially something difficult, Truck was who you called, explained one former associate who requested anonymity. The name wasn't just about his size, it was about dependability when things got complicated. This reliability extended beyond physical intimidation to logistical operations. Craig's background in transportation before joining the Hells Angels gave him specialized knowledge that proved valuable for moving both legal and illegal cargo. His understanding of shipping routes, customs procedures, and transportation regulations made him an asset for cross-border operations that formed the backbone of the organization's business interests. The road name Truck carried significant status within the club. Unlike more colorful or derogatory nicknames often assigned to newer members, Craig's moniker reflected respect and acknowledged his utility to the organization. When members referred to Truck, they were invoking not just a person, but a known quantity, someone with established credibility and a specific skill set. In the aftermath of his murder, the name Truck has taken on new significance. Within club circles, references to his death are made using only this road name, a final acknowledgement of his identity within the organization. For investigators, understanding the full implications of this nickname has provided valuable insight into Craig's role and the potential motivations behind his execution. The man may have died in a Burlington parking lot, but the legacy of Truck continues to reverberate through the criminal underworld he inhabited. As investigators pieced together the final days of Craig Truck McKilquam, they had to consider both identities, the suburban father and the patched Hell's Angel, to understand why someone decided he needed to die. The road name that followed him for years ultimately became part of his legacy in death, appearing in tributes from brothers around the world who knew him not as Craig, but always as Truck. The Code of Silence: Why the Case Went Cold. Despite the public nature of Craig McKilquam's execution, the investigation quickly hit a wall that's familiar to anyone who's worked organized crime cases: the unbreakable Code of Silence. This omerta, borrowed from traditional mafia culture but equally powerful in outlaw motorcycle clubs, ensures that witnesses don't cooperate, associates don't talk, and even peripheral figures maintain absolute silence when questioned by authorities. We had dozens of potential witnesses. One frustrated Holton Regional Police detective told local media months after the shooting. People who were in the restaurant, people who may have seen the shooter, people who knew Craig's movements that day. But almost no one would talk substantively. It was like hitting a brick wall. The effectiveness of this code is particularly evident in how quickly the investigation stalled. Despite the murder occurring in a busy public location with numerous witnesses, police struggled to develop actionable leads. The grey Honda Civic spotted near the scene was never located. Surveillance footage provided only vague descriptions of the shooter. Even Craig's known associates claimed to have no insights into why he might have been targeted. This wall of silence extends beyond direct Hells Angels members. Anyone connected to the club's extended network, from girlfriends and family members to business partners and even legitimate acquaintances, understands that cooperation with police can have severe consequences. The threat doesn't need to be stated explicitly. It's simply understood as an immutable rule of engagement with this world. It's not just fear of physical retribution, explains one academic who studies outlaw motorcycle gangs. It's a cultural norm. Cooperating with law enforcement makes you an outcast not just from the club, but from an entire social ecosystem. For many people, that's their whole world. The few people who spoke to police provided only the most basic information, carefully avoiding anything that might actually help solve the case. This calculated approach to providing minimal cooperation without actually assisting the investigation is a sophisticated tactic that outlaw motorcycle clubs have perfected over decades of law enforcement scrutiny. For investigators, breaking this code becomes the primary challenge in solving cases like Craig's murder. Without witnesses willing to come forward, without insiders providing context, and without anyone breaking ranks, even a public execution can remain unsolved indefinitely. This culture of silence doesn't just protect the specific individuals involved in Craig's murder, it protects the entire organizational structure and operational security of the club. The legacy, what his death reveals about modern organized crime.
A man in his 50s was gunned down last night in the parking lot of the Mandarin restaurant in Burlington. Police confirmed that the victim had just finished dining at the buffet before being shot outside.
The murder of Craig Truck McKilquam offers a rare window into the evolution of organized crime in Canada. Far from the stereotypical biker image of the 1970s and 80s, today's outlaw motorcycle clubs operate with sophisticated business models, international connections, and members who can seamlessly blend into suburban life while maintaining their criminal affiliations. This isn't Sons of Anarchy, explained one organized crime analyst. Modern outlaw motorcycle clubs are essentially multinational corporations with violent enforcement divisions. They have diversified revenue streams, risk management strategies, and members specifically selected for their ability to move between different worlds. Craig's double life exemplifies this evolution. His ability to maintain a quiet suburban existence while simultaneously operating within the Hells Angels reflects how the organization has adapted to increased law enforcement scrutiny. Rather than standing out, many members now focus on blending in, maintaining legitimate businesses, living in respectable neighborhoods, and saving their colors for club functions rather than daily wear. The professional nature of his execution also demonstrates the calculated approach modern criminal organizations take toward internal discipline or conflict resolution. This wasn't a bar fight gone wrong or an impulsive act of revenge. It was a carefully planned operation with clear objectives, precise execution, and a clean getaway. Such sophistication suggests an organization with resources, planning capabilities, and operational security protocols more commonly associated with intelligence agencies than street gangs. Craig's international connections reveal another aspect of modern organized crime: its global reach. The tributes from Switzerland, Denmark, and the Caribbean show how today's criminal networks transcend borders, leveraging technology and globalization just as legitimate businesses do. These aren't isolated local clubs, but interconnected organizations with global infrastructure. Perhaps most telling is how the investigation into Craig's murder stalled against the wall of silence. Despite significant advances in forensic technology, surveillance capabilities, and investigative techniques, law enforcement still struggles to penetrate organizations built on absolute loyalty and ruthless enforcement of internal rules. The code that protected the secrets of criminal organizations a century ago remains equally effective today. Craig McKilquam's story ended in that Burlington parking lot, but what his life and death reveal about the changing face of organized crime will continue to challenge law enforcement, fascinate the public, and influence how we understand the criminal underworld operating in plain sight within our communities. His murder remains officially unsolved, another cold case that demonstrates how effective the code of silence can be, even in an age where privacy seems increasingly impossible to maintain. The next time you pass a quiet suburban home or see a businessman in a coffee shop, remember Craig McKilquam. Behind the ordinary facade of everyday life, parallel worlds can exist. Worlds with their own rules, hierarchies, and consequences for those who step out of line. In the end, Craig's story isn't just about one man's murder. It's about the shadowy organizations that continue to evolve and operate despite society's best efforts to contain them.